Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to be trying to get a good cup of coffee out of a Keurig coffee maker. Now typically I will say that a good cup of coffee comes down to three distinct things. First thing is your water quality. If you're using tap water, it may have a lot of minerals and other contaminants in it that can throw off the taste of your coffee. The other thing is a good type of beans. If you get good beans, you've already got a good piece of the equation. So between these two, you've already got the makings of a good cup of coffee. Now, what is the third option, you might ask? That comes down to brew method. Typically, I like to brew my coffee in what's known as a French press. Typically, you take the grounded coffee, you put it in here, you pour hot water over it, let it steep for a little bit, and then this filter on the bottom presses down the coffee beans, extracting the flavor, and then you can pour a nice cup of coffee from that. There are other methods such as the Chemex, the pour over, and the AeroPress. All have their strengths and their weaknesses. So what about the Keurig? Well, that's what we're here to take a look at. The Keurig is akin to a traditional pour over type of coffee maker, kind of a step up from a Mr. Coffee, if you will. Typically, it takes those little K-pods, and we're going to do something similar, but taking it to the next level. With the K-pods, you don't know when they were manufactured. They're typically pre-ground, so you also don't know when they were ground last. So you're getting an unknown time that they've been sitting on the shelf, and the flavor could be just getting lost in there. Because as soon as you grind some coffee beans, you start to oxidize them. And that oxidization will take away from the actual coffee flavor. Now, that's why I prefer to grab whole bean coffee. You can grind it yourself, you can grind it to your typical thickness, whatever your method of brewing would be. For a French press, it would be coarse thick. For a pour over like this, somewhere around the medium range. And if you're doing espresso, ultra fine, almost like powdered sugar. So here I have what is known as a reusable K-cup. We'll take a look at that here real quick. So all this is just a coffee pod that you can then fill with your own type of coffee. It has a max fill line in there. You go ahead and put the lid on, you give it a twist to lock it, and it goes right inside just like a typical K-cup. The advantage to this is that you can now use your own whole bean coffee that you can grind yourself. You can fill it to the exact level that you want as far as strength. And that way you know that you are getting at least two of the good variables that I mentioned earlier, which is good quality water and good quality coffee. Now let's talk about the water selection just for a little bit. I mentioned you probably don't want to use tap water. The reason you don't is again some contaminants that may be in there. So what I prefer is I use filtered water or bottled water. Either or is fine. For the ground coffee, you can either get pre-ground or whole bean. As if you get pre-ground, look for stuff that says roasted on date on it, and that will actually give you the best coffee for your buck. Because at least then you know how fresh it is. Sell by doesn't really mean anything other than the manufacturer says it should be off the shelf by this time or it's going to taste terrible. With roasted on, you actually know it was probably within a decent time frame and you're going to get something that's relatively fresh. So without further ado, we're going to go through the steps needed for a traditional Keurig style brewer and what we're going to do to make a good cup of coffee. So here we have the traditional setup. You have your Keurig, you have your water tank, your favorite mug. Of course, mine is Star Wars, none else. You've got your little K-pod or your reusable K-pod here. You have your coffee grinder. Mine is a little more fancy. We'll take a quick look at it here. So what you're seeing here is the Baratza Encore. I can change the coarseness of the grind up here, and like I said, medium grind right here in the middle is typically what you want to get. And then a good bag of beans. This Cafe au lait usually is decent. And then I have this Flying Cinder, if I can get it to focus here, oak roasted coffee from Summer Moon. It doesn't want to focus for some reason, but that's okay. There we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually go ahead and set this up for the best success. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and grind the coffee. I already have some that is pre-ground here, and I stick it in this mason jar because they're airtight. They don't let any air in or out, so whatever air is in there, and it's not going to keep exchanging and oxidizing further. So I like to store it in here if I don't use it all. Typically I only grind enough for what I need, but we're going to go ahead and take this out. We're going to go ahead and open up the K-Pod. And like I said, there is a max fill line in there, that little blue tab. You don't want to fill it over that, otherwise it could actually explode in the coffee maker. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and scoop in some coffee here. I typically do about 3 hefty scoops here, and that will get you a good strong cup of coffee while also keeping it, as you see, below the fill line. It's a little hard to see in there. Don't have the best lighting in the kitchen. So once you have that, you just go ahead and line up the little lock mechanism, twist it, and it's locked. Make sure it's not going to fall out. Then you go ahead and open up your Keurig, and it just kind of places right in, face down, just like that. And so what this does is it pushes this bottom portion out of the way, and it pushes the needle back so there's no needle actually puncturing this. And the top needle, where the water comes from, sits right here in the middle. So we go ahead and close that. It'll ask me, what do I want to do with it? I typically, with a 10 ounce, you can actually, on this method, or this model, select strong if you want. We're just going to go with traditional, and then you hit start. And then, of course, you know, it starts brewing. So here in a few minutes, we should start seeing a nice trickle stream here going. And this will give you a pretty decent cup of coffee. Now that the brew has completed, we can see we got a decent sized cup of coffee out of that. It'll go back through its little preheating method. Yours might actually do something a little different, but while it's doing that, feel free, you can actually open this back up. You just take the K-Pod or the reusable K-Pod right back out, and then you can actually see, ooh, this is actually kind of a little toasty here actually. You can actually just open this up, and you can see the actual coffee beans in there. If I can get this to focus again. There we go. So you see the coffee beans in there, they've been used up. I typically don't use more than once per fill, and then you just tap this out into the garbage or your favorite plants, because plants love spent coffee grounds, and then you just rinse it out and you're ready to go for the next one. And like I said, you can actually pre-grind a whole bunch, keep it in these little mason jars, and it actually works rather well. Now, to get the best flavor out of your coffee, we'll talk about that in just a second. Alright, so now we've brewed a cup of coffee using our Keurig brewer and our good batch of beans, some clear, delicious filtered water. And what I recommend is, once you've brewed the coffee, don't take that first sip right away. I mean, obviously you don't want to burn yourself or your tongue or something else like that. But the other part of it is, coffee actually tastes better if you let it cool down just a little bit. Maybe 2 to 5 minutes, and give it that extra little time to sit and just mellow out in itself. And that cooling actually will help release more of the flavors. If it's too hot, all you're going to get is that scalded kind of taste to it, and then of course you're going to damage your taste buds when you taste it. So give it about 2 to 5 minutes, let it sit down, let it mellow. Think of it like a tea, it's resting, or like a good steak. So once you've had it rested for a little bit, you know, you can go ahead and give it a good smell, because, you know, half of tasting actually is smell. If you don't believe me, think back to whenever you got a cold and you couldn't actually smell. Everything tasted bland. Half of coffee is the smell. So that's why when people put it into those travel mugs and they take a little sip, that's great and all, but you're not getting the good flavor because you're not getting the aroma of the coffee actually reaching your nose as intended. So if you have a nice wide mug, pour it into that, let it sit for a little bit, and then give it a sip. Now, that is a good cup of coffee. And that actually came out of a Keurig. So if you're you're in a rush, you just don't have time to sit there and do the whole French press method or an AeroPress method, which arguably is just as fast if you get used to it. Or if you just like using your Keurig, it's hot water on demand, you don't gotta wait for it. Perfectly fine. But now you know a little bit more how to get a good cup of coffee out of your Keurig coffee maker. This has been a quick tip from Nick Smith, the Midnight Smith. Thank you for stopping by, checking out this video, and I'll catch you on the next one. See you later.